Jason showed you that job growth in the region has been very slow since the recession ended. But beneath that slow growth overall, there's a considerable amount of churning as some industries shrink while other industries grow. The jobs created are a mixture of old jobs and new jobs by industry. By old jobs, we mean jobs that represent hiring that restores firms to where they were before and puts people back to work more easily. By new jobs, we're talking about hiring that transforms our region, changing the industrial mix, and may entail some skill upgrading for the workers involved. So what's the bottom line? The recent job creation in the region has been closely balanced between industries restoring jobs lost during the recession and industries that are creating new jobs that are transforming the economy. Due to the depth of the recession, though, both types of this job churning are much more pronounced than we saw in recent downturns. And the metro areas' experience varies considerably. So far, the new jobs that are being created tend to be in highly educated sectors. So let's go into this in a little more detail. I'm going to show you again the chart that Jason showed you. This is the chart of regional employment trends, and what this one does is show you total employment change indexed to employment at the trough. That's December 2007. And we're going to be comparing two periods. We're going to be comparing what happened during the recession to what happened during the recovery. And by the recession, I mean this shaded period. This is the official NBER recession. It's the period of time during which jobs declined most rapidly. And by recovery, I mean the 24 months after that, during which time job growth has been fairly flat. And you can see also that by this measure, New York State certainly has had a much more shallow recession than the U.S. and New Jersey. For Puerto Rico, we're going to take some different time periods because their recession has had such a different pattern. So for the recession, we're talking about June 2005 through June 2010. And for the recovery, we're talking about just the last year, June 2010 to now. And the other thing to notice, of course, is that the recession in Puerto Rico has been so much more severe. Okay, so what do we mean by saying that there's job growth during this time when employment has actually been so flat? This chart shows that despite the fact that we've only added 500,000 jobs in the U.S. over the past 2 years, if you add up all of the growth in growing industries, we've actually added almost 2 million jobs. Those have just been offset by job losses in the shrinking industries. This represents a lot of churning below the surface. Okay, so the question when we look at, say, these industries that are growing fastest is, what kinds of jobs are they adding? Replacement jobs for ones where they just laid off workers during the recession? Or are these new jobs that represent a transformation of the economy? And that's the question that we're going to be looking at. So when I talk about this churning, I'm going to be dividing the churning into two parts, new job churning and old job churning. So you can think of this in terms of a worker, and I'm going to call him Sam, who was an auto worker before the recession started. During the recession, Sam is laid off. Now, while laid off, Sam searches for other work, and one of two things can happen. Sam may be able to find a job back in the auto industry, return to an old job that was suspended during the recession, and then where they added new workers back in. And if that happens, if Sam's able to do that, then it's likely that Sam won't need retraining. Right. On the other hand, Sam may decide that his best opportunities are to go into a growing industry and might take a job as a medical technician in a hospital. In that case, retraining is likely to be needed. Okay, so when you think of old job churning, you're thinking of Sam going through a period of unemployment and going back to a job very similar to the one he left. When you think of new job churning, Sam goes to a new job. Okay. This kind of retraining that I'm talking about is actually fairly common. We have a vast network of community colleges in our country that provide this kind of training. The average age of students in those community colleges is 29, so they're dealing with a lot of mature workers. Sam may also need some job assistance job search assistance when he moves to the new industry, because he's not used to looking for work in that industry, not used to what kinds of occupational opportunities there are there. Okay, now sometimes this process also involves more than one worker. If Sam was of retirement age, he might decide to retire. And then the question is, the people who replace Sam in the workforce, do they go to the old jobs or to the new jobs? So this distinction also applies in that case. Now, last thing I want to mention here is that this concept is parallel to a distinction between structural and cyclical changes in the economy. But I'm going to stick to the terminology old jobs and new jobs because this is still an interim report on the recovery, and we'll have to wait a little longer to really know how structural versus cyclical these are. Now, the most current data allows us to look between industries, and that's what I'm going to do today. At a later date, when more data come in, we might be able to do the same sort of analysis on occupations. Okay, so why do we want to make this big distinction between new job churning and old job churning? It's because this old job churning is really about activity that has paused and then been restored, whereas the new job churning is activity that really transforms the area's economy. So compared with restoring old jobs, the new job creation offers a set of challenges. Firms have to take the effort to establish position and hire workers. Retraining may be needed, and there's more risk and stress for the workers, the firms, and the communities involved. But there are also a fair number of opportunities here, important opportunities. This is the way that a region becomes more competitive, and it sets the stage for further growth. It's essentially the way that we adjust to changing technology, to changes in trade patterns and consumption patterns. So how do we distinguish between this old job churning and new job churning? Simon Potter and I have published research on distinguishing between this kind of churning, and this grid shows you the strategy that we use. The grid is just a way of dividing up industries by their experience over the course of this cycle. So, first, on the right-hand side of the grid, we're going to put all the industries that grew more than average during the recession, that weren't as affected as much by the recession. And on the left side, we're going to put the industries that shrank more than average during the recession. On the top part of the grid, above the line, are going to be the industries, we're going to show the industry's experience during the recovery. Did they grow more than average during the recovery? If so, the industries will be on the top. And on the bottom, if they shrank more than average during the recovery, if they lost ground during the recovery, they're going to be on the bottom. And the final thing is, of course, the further away they are from the center, the more churning is involved. So let me take you through this. So let's think about healthcare. It grew during the recession, and then it grew during the recovery. So this is the area of the grid for all the industries that have shown new job growth. Okay. What about another industry that grew during the recession, or during the recovery? Administrative support. Now this includes temp workers, right? It shrank during the recession and has grown during the recovery. So this is an area for industries that are showing old job rebounds, right? People are being hired back into old jobs. Go down to this quadrant where we find construction. Construction lost jobs during the recession and then lost jobs during the recovery. For now, this is an industry with disappearing jobs. Might change in the future, but right now, these are disappearing. Finally, we have the quadrant that represents running against the tide. and these are primarily government jobs. When the recession hit, government expanded with aid to affected parties and stimulus spending. But now the governments are facing fiscal constraints. They're cutting back. So government jobs flow against the tide. Now let's look at all of the industries for New York State. Starting with the new job growth area, we have a set of industries, most job churning in New York new job churning coming from education. For the old jobs rebounding, here are the industries that are joining that: professional and technical workers, wholesale and retail trade. The disappearing jobs, we have a lot of manufacturing and, of course, construction. Perhaps historically surprising, we have real estate, finance, and information services. Real estate and finance is pretty easily explained by the path of this current recession. Information services is perhaps a little more surprising. Against the tide, we have the government sector, and the industry that's a little surprising to find in this quadrant right now is arts and entertainment. Okay, so then if we want to characterize what kind of churning New York is undergoing, we think about, well, if most of our industries were in these two quadrants, the old jobs rebounding and the running against the tide, then this would be a recession that was primarily about rehires into old jobs, old job churning. On the other hand, if most of the churning was due to new job growth and disappearing jobs, then this would be a lot of new job churning, and this would be very transformational. This would represent an area that was undergoing a lot of transformation in its jobs. Finally, of course, the further away these industries are from the center, the more churning we have overall. Okay, so what about New Jersey? I just showed you the pattern for New York. Take a look at New Jersey. What's the same between New York and New Jersey? Well, a lot of the key sectors are located in exactly the same quadrants in New York and New Jersey: healthcare, education, administrative support, construction, manufacturing, government. Well, what's different? Well, we have more growth in healthcare, more losses in construction, manufacturing, and information services. We have fewer industries with job growth, and these industries are a bit more spread out than we found in New York. So there's just more churning overall. We've done this sort of analysis for Puerto Rico as well. So if you're interested in Puerto Rico, you should take a look at the appendix. But what you may ask now, having looked at this, is, gee, how do we summarize all of this? This is fairly complicated. And there's a way to measure the differences between states, and that's what we call our churning index. Our churning index is essentially going to summarize the difference between these two charts. And what it does is it adds up all of the industry employment changes during the recession and the recovery. The old job churning index is going to add up the employment changes due to losses and rebounds. The new job churning index adds up job changes due to shrinking and growing industries, and the total index just sums them up. The scale that we're using is the share of employment affected. It rises with the depth of the recession or the amount of the transformation. So to fix ideas, if it were 0, this would be stable. No change at all, right? All of those industries would be right in the center, and there'd be no change. If, for example, one of these indices was 20%, that would say that 20% of jobs in the economy, for instance, moved from shrinking industries to growing industries. 1 in 5 jobs changed places, right? Or if it were 20% on the old job churning, then it would be the 20% of jobs ceased to exist during the recession and came back. So how does this look? Start with the U.S., with the recession, dating this by when the recession started. The new job churning index for the U.S. is about 3.5%. So about 3.5% of jobs have changed from shrinking industries to growing industries over the course of the recession so far. How does that compare to New York? and New Jersey and Puerto Rico. New York's a little bit less. New Jersey is about the same. Puerto Rico, much higher, much more transformation in Puerto Rico. What about old job churning, stopping and starting of jobs? Well, for the U.S., the balance is almost 50-50. About 3.5% of jobs also show this kind of the churning that represents hiring back to old jobs. For the states in our area, New York, New Jersey, the balance is also fairly close to even between the two. They're both smaller in New York State, a little more similar in New Jersey, and of course far bigger in Puerto Rico. And the total churning in the U.S. is about 7%. So about 7% of jobs have been affected one way or the other during this recession. How does this compare to a previous recession? I'm going to use 1990 because it avoids the influence of 9/11 in it. Okay. In previous work, we found that the 1990 and 2001 recessions were heavily weighted towards new job churning. Now what we see is, of course, nationally, that we have much more churning than we did in the last recession, or in the 1990 recession, and that we're less weighted towards new jobs in this recession. So we have more churning of both kinds, but we have particularly more old job churning in this recession nationally, and that carries through for New York and New Jersey as well. Although New York, as we see, this is not as deep a recession as the 1990 one was. Okay, and most of the difference between these is, of course, in the old job churning, not the transformational churning. That goes along with the idea that a shallow recession may be less broad-based. So how does this play out for the region? We have in one metro area, let's look at the balance between old job churning and new job churning, but for metro areas in our region. Most of the churning in Elmira is old job churning, and that's the only metro area for which most of the churning has been old job churning. For most of the metros, we have pretty close to a balance between the two of them. But in 5 metro areas, we have a balance towards new job churning, and those are Binghamton, Utica, Albany, Putnam, and Long Island. These are the areas that stand out as undergoing most transformation. So let me wrap up by talking about what kinds of jobs are being created and destroyed and what effect this new job churning might be having. I'm going to frame this in terms of long-term national trends. Generally speaking, over the past couple of decades, the kinds of jobs that have been created have been those that use creativity, innovativeness, complex thought, or education. So think in terms of perhaps healthcare professionals. Or that require personal contact and ability to communicate. So hotel clerks might be an example there. Disappearing jobs are those that are routine so that they can be easily automated. So manufacturing assembly workers jobs might be included there. And tradable jobs, ones that are easily defined and moved. So data entry clerks might be an example of that. So let's see if we can tell if we can identify the educational impact of new job churning on the region. I'm going to look at which industries have been adding jobs in the region. Healthcare, some of the ones most consistently adding jobs are healthcare, education, accommodation, and food services. And for this exercise, I'm going to use one particular measure of skill. There are others. This one is the share of workers with a college education. You can see 2 out of 3 of these industries have a high share of workers with a college education. What jobs are are disappearing for now? Construction, manufacturing. All 3 of those have a low share of workers with a college education. So what difference could this shift make over this recession and recovery? Is it large enough to make a difference? We can simulate that. Let me start off by showing you the share of workers with a college degree in 2007 when the recession began. New York State and New Jersey started off with a much higher share of workers with a college education, about 32% in the U.S. as a whole. if we use the Churning Index and the share of workers in each industry with a college degree, we can simulate the impact of the movement of jobs from the disappearing industries to the growing industries, and that's shown in the green bars there. So we've added about 0.5% to the share of employment workers with a college degree during this recession and recovery, which is quite substantial for this short period of time. So just to summarize, the recovery is far from complete. Job creation has been closely balanced between old and new jobs in the nation and the region. Compared to recent downturns, most additional churning from this deep recession is old rather than transformational churning. And the regional area and the metro areas vary considerably in their experience. Old jobs put people back to work easily. New jobs help to transform the region and make it more competitive. Some workers, though, may require retraining, and this recent churning implies upskilling for the region, as new jobs tend to be in high-skill sectors. So, as you can see, many workers may return to work without needing to retrain or look far afield from the jobs they lost. However, an equal number may need to search outside the industry and possibly retrain. Thus, the need for job search assistance and training opportunities, such as we find in community colleges, may be particularly high in the region and the nation going forward. So, thank you for your attention, and I'll turn it over to Jack.